And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com, and joining me is Still Curtain contributor, Shayne Kubas. We're having some technical difficulties with my video, so if you're here joining us on YouTube, hopefully you can hear the audio okay, at least for our audio listeners. The Steelers are coming off a bye week, Shayne, and the bye couldn't have come at a more perfect time for multiple reasons. The Steelers were able to rest and recover some of their players that they could be getting back. We'll talk about our injuries later on. We talk about the Steelers-Commanders matchup this week in Week 10. And also, it lined up perfectly with the NFL trade deadline, which the Steelers exploited at the last minute, like we thought they might. And we're going to break down that. That's going to be our big topic of discussion today. What do we think of those trades? I want to get your thoughts. You and I have not chatted about the Mike Williams or the Preston Smith trade yet. So we're going to break down both of those. You and I will assign grades to those, and we'll talk about what the future outlook of the team looks like now that they have a few more veteran pieces in place here and what a potential playoff run could be. All right, Shayne, let's start, though, with the NFL trade deadline and some of the news around the NFL this week. The biggest moves, one of them was the Lions traded for edge rusher Zadarius Smith. I thought that was a great move by a team that lost Aiden Hutchinson for the year. And it's kind of nice, honestly, Shayne, to see the Browns in full-blown tank mode at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's the best thing for them to do. I mean, I know they had a little bit of a glimmer of hope when Jameis came in and wasn't Deshaun Watson, basically, right? Where he was just kind of playing quarterback at an NFL level. But they are firmly out of it, even in a kind of wide open back half of the AFC playoff race. And they wanted to try to get some assets for some players that aren't in their long-term future anyway, right? I don't think they're going to do a fire sale or any of the stuff that some people are reporting, but Smith moving to the Lions makes sense for both sides, even more so for the Lions.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a 32-year-old player, still a pretty solid football player at this stage of his career, but he wasn't going to offer anything. By the time this Browns team is competitive again, they are going to be without Zadarius Smith anyway, and so they're going to try to pitch him before the deadline. They got he went to the Lions. They get a 5th and 6th round pick, and I think they get a 7th in return, if I recall. And so one of the bigger moves of the deadline. Another one was the Commanders traded for Saints cornerback Marshawn Lattimore. I think Lattimore's probably best like at the early stages of his career, but kind of riding a little bit on namesake after that. I still think he's a good football player, but one of the bigger names to be traded right before the trade deadline this year.
Yeah, that was one that I was a little bit surprised by just because the Saints are just so averse to like actually doing anything with the future in mind. So that's kind of something I wasn't 100% sure that we could expect, but it makes a ton of sense for the Commanders. I'm not really sure if maybe you've heard or not. I'm not sure if he is expected to play in Week 10. I know he was dealing with some sort of like hamstring thing, but regardless whether he plays against us or for them in the future, it could really significantly upgrade their defense if he still has a little bit left in the tank there.
Yeah, for sure. And we obviously record this podcast before the first injury report comes out for the week. But it would be ironic, Shayne, to see the Jets trade for Devontae Adams and the Steelers have to play against him. And then the Commanders go and trade for Lattimore and the Steelers have to play against him. And then next week, Steelers get to play against Deontay Johnson, who the Ravens just traded for 2 weeks before the deadline. And so interesting how things work out that way. The Saints are they're not in a good shape at all financially right now. They are well in the hole. I think the number that I look at is changing all the time. I think there were $62 million in the salary cap hole. It's why I toyed with the idea of the Steelers maybe trying to make one of those Minkah Fitzpatrick level blockbuster moves for like Chris Olave. And then of course, Olave took the scary hit this past week. And obviously nothing came out of that as all. No. And then the Ravens traded for Tre'Davious White, Shayne, just before the deadline. White's not the same player that he used to be. I mean, this guy started off with a bang, and recently, I mean, he's been an afterthought. He's been a backup cornerback on the Rams. Now, maybe the Ravens can revive him to be something. I think he adds depth for them at a low cost, and that's about it.
Yeah, if anything, this is a downgrade for the Ravens in some ways, in my opinion, if he has to actually go out and play. Maybe last year I would have believed that they could have gotten something out of White, but their defense has not been the same without Mike McDonald. It just hasn't been the same unit in a lot of ways, and part of that I think is just maybe some downplaying by some guys or guys playing a little bit down this year. But Yeah, I don't expect that move to necessarily make a huge impact. And if it does, it's probably more so negative than positive impact for them.
Yeah, Shane, and outside of that, and the moves that actually occurred at the deadline and not Amari Cooper, Devontae Adams,
Right, those things, yeah.
DeAndre Hopkins, the Steelers had some of the more notable moves, and we're going to talk about those in just a little bit here. So let's get to that now. Steelers trade deadlines moves. Let's start with their first trade, which came roughly 3 hours, I think, before the NFL deadline, and that was they traded for Jets wide receiver Mike Williams. If you want to talk about not being surprised at a Steelers trade, it's this. We knew the second that the Jets were willing to trade for Devontae Adams, that Mike Williams would be a guy that's up for grabs. We knew the Steelers had some connection there, some interest in potentially grabbing a receiver like that. And there have been rumors all along the way. I was not surprised to see something happen, although the Steelers do like to kind of push the limits there down to the final seconds. But they grabbed Mike Williams in this trade. It did cost them a 5th round pick. They have 2 5th round picks next year. What are your overall thoughts on this trade? And do you agree with the compensation that Pittsburgh had to give up here?
I think I would have preferred to give up less, because this is a player that was already fallen out of favor with his current team, is clearly not the player he was in Los Angeles with the Chargers, who was one of the better number 2 receivers, I would say, and kind of ball winners on the outside. I do not think he's that player anymore, and he also wasn't really showing to be anything else for the Jets. However, for a 5th round pick, because we have 2 of them, you could do worse than sending a 5th round pick for a player that could potentially upgrade your unit, right? Like that's kind of what it comes down to. Is I don't expect this to be some huge boom for us in any way, but a 5th round pick is probably something we won't miss. And if the player who happens to be selected with the 5th round pick that we gave up, if he's awesome, then good for them. That happens sometimes, right? Like sometimes you hit on those picks, but in general, I'm just glad we didn't do anything over the top. If we weren't going to get somebody great, this is fine enough for me.
Yeah, Shane, the word that I use to categorize this trade is underwhelming. It's not the needle mover type move, and we knew that wasn't happening really.
No, probably not.
Receivers were off the market. I think that Cooper Kupp was potentially the last player like that go-to guy that can get run after the catch. And we knew that he wasn't going to be an option because the Rams have won 2 games in a row, and they're sitting right there tied with their division lead. And so the options dwindled really, really fast.
Yeah.
A name that everybody was eyeing was Darius Slayton.
That was a big one for me. Yeah.
His audition debut against the Steelers the week before the bye. And Slayton would have been a player who would pair really nicely with Russell Wilson. And ended up being Mike Williams, who is not having the greatest season right now. And on the Jets, through the first 9 weeks of the year, he caught 12 of 21 targets for 166 yards without a touchdown. He had a 41.3 passer rating when targeted by Aaron Rodgers. Now, I know that their scheme has issues, their coaching has issues, Rodgers has issues. I do think that Williams will be a better player on the Steelers than he was in the Jets. Really low bar. Hard not to be, I feel like. So we'll talk about that fit here in just a second when we give our grades. But that's my kind of initial thoughts on the trades for Mike Williams. Yes, you add depth. Yes, I think you are getting a guy who, at least for the Steelers, is going to be a wide receiver 2. Now, whether or not he should be a wide receiver 2 in the NFL is a completely different discussion. I think that he is a mid-level wide receiver 3 at this stage in his career. Not a slot receiver, but a wide receiver 3 in terms of talent and what we've seen from him. Now, you remember that Williams had an ACL tear in 2023, played just 3 games, was out the rest of the season. And unfortunately, I think that zapped a lot of his athletic traits. We'll see the further he gets removed from that ACL, if he can get any of that explosion back. Wasn't necessarily a fast player to begin with, kind of wins with body control down the field. So I still think that he's going to be good at his niche traits, but I don't think that it's going to be that needle mover type move for the Steelers.
Yeah, and it's kind of hard to think that it will be, just because of what we've seen from him in this season. Mm-hmm. But again, I think you're right in the sense that he could be a receiver 2 for us, right? For most other teams, maybe that's not great. And it still probably isn't necessarily great for us either. But when you have 2 guys on the outside that can win contested catch situations at the rate that these guys have shown at times in their careers, him and Pickens specifically, it is a weapon for a player that does like to throw the ball down the boundary like Russell Wilson does. Like, it is something that they can hopefully take advantage of better than they could if they just kept Van Jefferson out there as the primary wide receiver too. So, and even he won one, right? Like this last game, even he caught one. So like, if he can do it, you assume Williams will be able to do something similar. So we'll see how those two kind of pair up once he gets involved.
Yeah, Wilson throws a catchable ball for sure. And I think that it is a good pairing in terms of what Williams brings to the table. My least favorite thing about all of it, Shayne, isn't that they were willing to take a stab. I'm perfectly fine with that. And the Steelers have a quarterback who turns 36 years old this month. TJ Watt is 30. Cam Hayward's 35. We talk about the age of these players and how you need to capitalize on a window. Well, they at least tried to do that. Credit them for being aggressive here before the deadline. My biggest beef probably is the compensation that was given up.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lose sleep over surrendering a 5th round pick. And we do have confirmation that it's going to be the lower of the 2 5th rounders. So between the Steelers pick and the Rams pick that they acquired from their trade, it's going to be whatever one ends up being the lower pick. The Steelers get to keep the higher selection. So I guess if it's a difference between 10 spots, whatever, that's fine. It's a 5th round pick at the end of the day. But knowing at the same time, Shayne, how well Khan and Weidl have been drafting for the Steelers these past 2 years. I mean, you might be able to get a Nick Herbig with that pick. You might be able to get a Corey Trice with that pick. And so that is the type of that's the only hold up here for me. I really think that the fairest compensation based on the Mike Williams we saw in the first half of this season would have been to do a pick swap deal. The Steelers give a 5th and maybe they get a 6th back, maybe a 7th back at the very least. But you're splitting hairs here. You're talking about something that's not all that significant at the end of the day. It's just he was New York's 4th receiver for a short period of time there before Allen Lazard got hurt. They traded for Devontae Adams. They had Garrett Wilson. Lazard was still running over him, and I don't think Lazard is even a good receiver at all. No. And then Mike Williams as wide receiver 4. There's no team in the league really that could trade a wide receiver 4 and get that pick out of it, unless you're the Dallas Cowboys and you're willing to give up a 4th rounder for.
If you're the Commanders, you might have been able to get like a 4th or 5th for like Diami Brown or somebody like that, because he's technically kind of like their 4th receiver.
Maybe, maybe.
But like that's about it. There's not many other
30-year-old having a bad season, which legitimately he was. There's no getting around it. He's having a bad season. He's got 2 drops. He has a terrible passer rating when thrown to this year. He hasn't created separation. He has a career low yards after the catch per reception, 2.0, which is very low by NFL standards. And so just not showing really any of that, the player that we saw with the Chargers all those years prior. Hopefully he can get back to that. I've had an ACL tear myself. I know that it does take some time to recover. You can get back to full speed from that, but he's a guy that is now in his 30s, and we'll see what he does on the Steelers. Again, the compensation, the only hold up for me, I would have preferred, and I said this on the last week's pod, Shayne, when we went through team by team, talked about every possible option. Of the reasonable trades for the Steelers at the wide receiver position, I would have preferred Darius Slayton and Jacoby Myers. Those are the 2 that I was eyeing for what I think probably would have been similar draft capital, but you're getting younger, more explosive players who I think would have offered more to this team. Mike Williams, you're getting an upgrade over Van Jefferson. I'm not sure how much more than that it is, but we'll find out. I still think that he has something left to offer. Let's talk about the Steelers trade for edge rusher Preston Smith. This one was intriguing to me, and I didn't see it coming. Like,
to me,
we knew that Pittsburgh had issues on the edge with injuries, with overworking TJ Watt, who has not been able to. He's seeing a career high snap percentage right now. And that's not what you want for your 30-year-old defensive player of the year. He needs to be able to take some breaks. This is going to offer that.
Yeah, this move is the one that I was really surprised by, because we've talked about it for a long time, Tommy. And I don't want to sit here and say that, like, oh, they know we're right now. I don't want to be that podcast, right? That's like, oh, they listen to us. They don't. But the point is that this is something we've harped on for really years of doing this now, where it's like, why do we not have, and we got a little bit of a reprieve with Marcus Golden last year, but like, why do we not have 4 capable edge rushers on the roster at all times? Like, why are we, like, is this one of the most unserious parts of this organization is weirdly that part? Like that, I was like, how in the world are we not getting 4 guys in this room when you have 2 of the best players, especially maybe the best duo in the sport, you got to have some protection behind those guys because they can't play all the snaps despite them wanting to do that for whatever reason. This does give them a little bit more protection because Herbig has already been banged up. Obviously, we were out without Highsmith for a while there. Watt, like you said, is playing an insane amount of snaps for a 30-year-old edge player who is as active as he is. This gives them a little bit of breathing room to take both of those guys off the field occasionally. And Smith has not been great this year in terms of like the underlying numbers, but he's a veteran player that knows how to win. He's a bigger bodied edge. He can kind of handle some of the run defense stuff. Like he is a true like veteran at this point where like he's not going to be flashy. He's not going to be as good as maybe he was a couple years ago, but he's going to be a true like difference maker in the edge rotation if he plays enough snaps.
Yeah, Shayne, for as long as I can remember, I mean, the Steelers always keep 4 edge rushers, call them outside linebackers if you want to. I think the game has changed a lot since the early 2000s, and we're still using that term. But they've always kept 4 guys on the edge. I don't remember the last time they've kept more than that. And typically what they have is 2 starters that play a lot of snaps and 1 guy that can rotate in for a smaller percentage of snaps to spell the starters of some much needed rest and then come back in. So you can go back to the early stages of TJ Watt's career, Bud Dupree on the other side. And then eventually Alex Highsmith was that 3rd guy. Bud Dupree leaves. Alex Highsmith is the guy, and then Nate Herbig. So they've only had 3 guys there. And the 4th guy is typically just a special teams guy and rarely sees the field.
Really. Which is what I'm like crazy.
I always thought this was baffling. I know we've had this conversation before, but your team is literally built around the success of your defense and your pass rush, specifically around TJ Watt and his health and what he can do. And for knowing that's your philosophy, that you need a pass rush and you need TJ Watt to stay healthy, it was kind of baffling to me that they only went into the season and have only gone into the season with 3 capable edge rushers almost every single year. Now they had Marcus Golden for a little bit there. That was the one exception to this. Everything else, it's like you got 3 edge guys, you've got a core special teamer, and that's it. Now you have that legitimate 4th edge again, who's a really good football player. And this is where it goes back to really be careful to not be a box score checker when you're talking about Preston Smith. He's going to look incredibly unimpressive if you do that. The guy's got 10 pressures in 9 games. He's had 6 tackles over the last 4 games.
Yeah,
that's not what he's going to do. He's not going to be the super splash playmaker, but he is long, strong, and stout at the point of attack. And the Steelers desperately needed that guy, I think, because they've struggled against the run more than they struggled rushing the passer. And I think he's the anti Nick Herbig in that you can play him on early down work. He's going to set the edge for you. He's going to be a physically imposing run defender. And I think that works perfectly with what they have, where Watt and Highsmith are the really well-balanced guys. Herbig's your speed rusher, your rusher specialist off the edge. And now you have Preston Smith, who can play early down work. Heck, the guy can kick inside. He can play interior defensive line. He's done that during his career in Washington. And even this year, he's bounced all around. He has 8 snaps at defensive tackle this year. He's played both end spots. He's played 7 technique, 9 technique. Like, the guy can be moved up and down, and he can flip sides too. He doesn't have to. He's not just a right edge or a left edge. He can play on either side. And so I'll be interested to see how the Steelers use him here. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. But this was a trade that caught me off guard because I didn't see the Steelers with Highsmith and Herbig here getting ready to return to full health. I didn't know if they would be desperate enough to go out and make a trade. Really glad they did, though, because every team should be 4 or 5 deep at the edge position. It's too important of a position to just rely on the health of your starters. And if something goes wrong, we already saw what happened. Then Jeremiah Moon comes into the lineup.
Yeah, again, I didn't expect this, but this is one of those moves where I'm like, okay, I like that they actually accepted the fact that they do need more help in that room. Like, they need more snaps from that room. And Jeremiah Moon is not going to give you those. Clearly, they didn't think that he could do that, which is fair, for what he's shown. So they go out and get a veteran who can do, again, he's the opposite of, like you said, Herbig, where it's like, yeah, he can come in and spell either, probably more so Highsmith, I would guess, on early downs because of how great Watt is against the run. But, whoever it ends up being, like, you can give these guys some breaks. And that maybe means, Herbig can come in for Watt occasionally on some less imperative downs, we'll call them, second downs or second and longs, whatever, like that type of snaps. Like you can start getting these guys fresh a little bit more for the third down opportunities in the game that you only get so many of.
Yeah, 100%. And I think there's a trend with both of these players too. They are guys who had a lot of success in the past, very tenured, like legitimately 10-year NFL players, both
Mike
of them
Tomlin
at
All-Stars.
this stage. So yes, they are. And so to me, they're not to the stage of afterthought like a Miles Jack. Or,
no, it's a little different than that. Yeah,
who was the
different.
corner, the Commander's corner? This yeah, but at the deadline,
Jackson.
Will Jackson.
Will
So
Jackson.
no, they're not that washed. They're still good football players that could do something for this team, but they value the experience, they value the veteran leadership, and at this stage, it's like your quarterback turns 36 anyway. What does it matter if these guys are 30, 31 years old? Like you have to win. You got to capitalize on this window right now. So the age doesn't mean anything to me there. Rental situations, really. I mean, you look at Mike Williams. They're just going to have him for the rest of this year. We'll see what happens. I don't know how much interest they'll have in signing him to an extension unless he has a really good season or he wants to come back. And then with Preston Smith, his cap numbers go up to at least $12 million base salary each of the next 2 years. And so that's a steep price to pay for a guy that I think is going to be 32, 33 years old in those deals. And so hard to believe the Steelers are going to do that unless he just has like an unbelievable season. And I don't think that's going to be the case either because he's not going to get enough snaps to even be that type of guy. So
no.
All right. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. If you guys are joining us here in the live chat, please drop a question for us. Any players you would have liked the Steelers to trade for. How do you feel about the Mike Williams and Preston Smith trade? Whatever it is, we'd love to be able to answer those questions for you and engage in some conversation here on the YouTube channel. All right, Shayne, let's grade the Steelers' moves at the deadline. Talked about both of them in pretty good detail so far. So I can start with you, Shayne. We'll talk Mike Williams. Give me a grade that you would put on this. And obviously this is going to change by the end of the season, but what is your initial thoughts and what grade would you assign to this move?
I think this one is about as good of an example of a C as you can get because the need was there. So they filled the need. That's a plus. The player they got, not who I would have preferred. So that's a negative, right? Like, okay, on the other side, he has a good skill set for the quarterback, but that skill set has diminished and he hasn't been as good this year at that thing. Like, it kind of, no matter what you look at, it's like there's the positive aspect of it and the negative aspect of it. And then you put in the compensation. It's like fifth-round pick's a little bit steep. However, it's a fifth-round pick at the end of the day. Is it likely to turn out into a player that plays for you for a while? It all kind of balances out for me, which is why I end up on a C, because I do think there's a chance that he could actually truly impact the offense if he can get even back to like 80-85% of what he was with the Chargers, considering how poor our receiver depth is and our receiver room has been outside of a few splash plays here and there. So I feel like a C, anything more than a C is being too optimistic, but anything less than that is kind of being nitpicky at that point.
Shayne, I'm right with you. I'm right with you there. And I can see both sides of the argument. I wanted the Steelers to do something because of the state that they're in right now. You've got to capitalize on this window. Even if Russell Wilson comes back for another season next year, he's not going to come back for the veteran minimum. No. The time to capitalize and to make a splash move is right now. I don't love the player that they got. I don't think that he's been very good on the Jets this year. I can get behind, obviously, his Chargers career, but there's a projection there. You have to expect him to look more like that player than the player we saw the last 9 weeks, even playing with Aaron Rodgers, it's not a scrub quarterback, but obviously not as good as he once was for sure. Yeah. So I will give this I'm going to give it a C+. And I think the reason I'll do that is because I can absolutely see the fit with Mike Williams in Pittsburgh's offense. Me too. Launching those moon balls down the sidelines. We know that even if Mike Williams doesn't have speed, it doesn't separate right now, he has really good body control as a 6'4" receiver who can still box guys out down the field. And that might be enough. That might be enough to give this offense a boost. You've got Pickens doing on one side. You've got Williams doing it on the other. Maybe when you're in 11 personnel, you can run Calvin Austin in the slot. You can go heavy and then roll. And then off of these PA boots, both of those guys can be streaming down and one of them can get open. I like the potential fit with the Steelers a lot more than I liked his fit with the Jets. That just wasn't going to work out for him there. So for that reason, I'm cautiously optimistic about it. At the same time, what prevents me from going any higher than that, and arguably even lower than that, is I don't like giving up a 5th round pick for a guy that I didn't feel like was playing like hardly a rosterable receiver so far this season. I mean, he's the 105th graded wide receiver from Pro Football Focus, if you care about that at all. And if you don't care about that, just the stats show you that he's been really poor in terms of creating separation, poor on a per target basis from the quarterback. That, like I said, that 43.1 pass rating when targeted just hasn't done a lot, and everything's been in contested situations. Still can box guys out down the field, and we saw examples of that already this year. I'm going to give it, this is me being my most optimistic right now. I'm going to give it a C+ in hopes that it does end up being better, notably better than like having a Van Jefferson on the outside, and it gives this team a little bit of a boost right there. So let's talk about Preston Smith.
Yeah.
And Shayne, go ahead and give me a grade for this trade.
I think you have to give this a B+ because I'm not going to give it an A, because I think for you to get an A, you have to actually make like a truly impactful addition. And I don't think Smith is going to necessarily play enough and an important enough role, excuse me, to be able to earn that A grade necessarily. But a B, you barely gave anything up, right? You get a proven edge rusher in that room whenever you've had injuries to the position already this year. You need to find snaps to get these guys off the field occasionally. And if it's going to be anybody, it has to be somebody like this, because Mike Tomlin loves his vets. We know this. Like, he's not going to hesitate to put Preston Smith out there for 15, 20 snaps if he has to. He's not going to be like, oh no, what am I going to do? like he does with some players. It seems like he will be willing to play him if he plays well enough and he can give them a good breather. So that one just feels kind of easy money, especially because there's no real harm in it. If they don't want to keep him past this year, they can just basically cut him. He just served his contract essentially in terms of guaranteed money, so you don't have to worry about that. It just, again, feels like the kind of move that a contender makes to solidify a position group, and I like it.
Yeah, Shayne, I will go a little bit higher. I'm going to give it an A-. And the reason is I think you're getting a starting caliber edge rusher who can play up and down the defensive line for next to nothing. I mean, it's sure it's a half-year rental based on the contract, but you're giving up a 7th round pick to bolster one of the most important positions on your team. And for the Steelers, probably the 2nd or 3rd most important position on their entire team. It gives you the depth. It gives you the security. If Highsmith goes down for the year, all of a sudden you've got a guy there who can step in, do early down work, and allow Nick Herbig to feast. And so I think the security that it offers, my initial thoughts, and I've always been a Preston Smith fan too, because of what he brings and because of his run defensibility. But I think that this is the perfect type of move for a team like the Steelers trying to compete right now. You know that he's going to be good. You know that he's going to be a solid run defender. I don't have any reserves about that at all. And so I'm going to give that an A- initially. Obviously, if he doesn't play that much, and if he's like clearly like the 4th man out and just grabs a few snaps a game, this will go down for me by the end of the season. I'll be like, all right, why aren't you playing him a little bit more on early downs? Why aren't you try to mix him and get him a little bit more involved on the defensive line? So his usage obviously will determine my grade by the end of the season. But my initial thoughts, really like Preston Smith. I think he's had a great 10-year NFL career so far. I think that he's still a really good run defender in the NFL, even if he doesn't offer much from a pass rush standpoint at this point. But good run defenders are hard to find. You just don't get guys, even like the tone-setting edge rushers who can completely shut down the run on their side. And I think that's something that Smith has done really well. So I'll give it an A- initially, and maybe we can revisit these by the end of the year. All right, Shayne, let's talk about the biggest winners and losers from these trades as it pertains to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So we'll start with Mike Williams. Who is the biggest beneficiary of the Steelers getting Williams?
I think there's 2 players right off the bat that I think are the biggest winners. One, of course, is Russell Wilson, because you get him another target to throw to, and specifically a target that fits the mold of what he wants, right? Like what works well with him, a guy that can go up and get the football in contested catch situations and deep down the field situations. Like, this is a guy that I think once they kind of hopefully can find some chemistry, he will be willing to, when it's 3rd and 12 and we need a play, and we're kind of willing to punt the ball if need be, but we need to take a shot. If Pickens is double covered or everybody's covered down the field, he will throw one up to a guy like this, and there's always a chance it works out, right? Like that's kind of a big thing, I think, for this offense. And then the other one is George Pickens to a certain degree, because he is the only guy on this team that fits that profile. So people know that. It hasn't really stopped him from being productive in the 2 games that Wilson has played with him now. But it is something that teams will have to realize, like, okay, we can't just cover Pickens because Williams could do a similar thing on the other side of the field. So I think it just kind of opens things up a little bit for those deep shot opportunities when you have 2 guys that are able to win contested catches like that. Because now it's not as simple as like, all right, well, if we really can't afford to give up a contested catch, let's just double George Pickens. Well, maybe that won't matter now if you do that. Maybe Mike Williams will be able to get open enough to make one himself. So I think those are the 2 that stand out to me right away as winners here.
Yeah, those are the 2 for sure. And I would say Wilson even much more heavily than I would say Pickens, because he likes that type of receiver. Now,
he just does.
Obviously, if you had the total package, like the DK Metcalf type, where you have the speed and the body control down the field. Yes, he does not have the speed. I mean, I would not be surprised if he is a 4'6'8" guy at this point. But when you're 6'4", and you've been boxing guys out for 10, 12 years, going back to your college days, and you can still do that. And with the balls that Wilson throws up there, it's kind of like, unlike what any other quarterback does. Like, he puts so much air under that ball. He gives you so much time to adjust
like
to
a
it.
Punt a lot of times.
It really is. It's like fielding a punt. And so, I think that Williams is going to bounce back from that really sluggish first half of the season that he saw. I don't think that it's going to be like otherworldly efficient or anything. I don't think he's going to start averaging 10 yards a target, but I can see him being much more efficient in this Arthur Smith offense, and with a quarterback that I think really fits well with his skill set. So I think Russell Wilson is the overall biggest beneficiary. And like you said, Pickens, hopefully it alleviates some of the pressure from him, at least having a competent, we hope, receiver on the other side of him. Van Jefferson was coming off of his best game, and he had a really nice back shoulder catch on a deep ball down the right sideline before the bye week there. But he's just not consistent, just not reliable. I think through the first 6 games of the season, he had 62 yards. Like, this is not a receiver you can go to. And Calvin Austin was clearly the more threatening of the 2, but Austin is only going to be so big. And I think that he just projects best from the slot anyway. So I think getting another outside threat and another big body who can win contested stuff down the field is going to be beneficial for Wilson for sure. And Shayne, let's talk about the other side of this, the losers from the Mike Williams trade. Who has the most to lose now that this deal has been made?
Well, I think first you have to say Van Jefferson, right? Because his role is probably going to be the one that goes away first, most likely, of course, where he has been the other outside receiver next to Pickens. That should change as early as this week, but I do think it'll probably take a little bit of time for him to actually lose full snaps, in terms of not really playing a ton in general. But eventually that's going to happen, you think, right? And if it doesn't, then it's not great. But I assume that he will be the biggest loser there. And then really, you could say the rest of the depth receivers, but we've gotten nothing from them. How much are they really losing by him coming in here? It really probably doesn't matter too much. I will say, as far as other losers go, though, I mean, I don't really know if there's really any other true losers here, because again, it's not a huge move. It's not going to affect the target share that much. I do think Williams will be able to be targeted more often than Jefferson has been able to be. But even last week, if he gets the same amount of targets as Jefferson got last week, that's not going to really change things too much in terms of who gets targets and who doesn't. So.
Yeah, Shayne, I do think that you mentioned Van. Obviously, Van. That's
the biggest
one, because
yeah.
that was the opposite outside receiver across from George Pickens.
Yeah,
his role is going to get cut, no question. But I also think Calvin Austin's is going to diminish a little bit too, because Van is a guy who can play the slot, and so if they decide to go with a little bit bigger personnel, maybe they use him there.
I can see that,
and it cuts into Austin's snap count a little bit. And then another guy who could be the biggest loser of them all, because he may lose his job, is Scotty Miller.
That's true.
And Miller's only played 8 special teams snaps on the season for the Steelers. He's not a special teams guy. He was just that depth wide receiver. And believe it or not, Shayne, I looked at this today. Scotty Miller's played 23% of offensive snaps for the Steelers. He's out there one of every 4 snaps.
He's been out there.
So that's going to go way down. And now that you are clearly the 5th receiver on this team, the Steelers are going to have to ask themselves, is this guy who suddenly is not seeing the field anymore, is he worth keeping around on our roster? Is he certainly wouldn't be active on game day, I can't imagine, until an injury happens, as soon as Williams is up to speed and ready to go, because he just doesn't offer anything on special teams. And so I think that's a potential cut candidate to keep an eye on if the Steelers want depth somewhere else.
Maybe.
I'm okay with keeping him around as like a healthy game day scratch in the event that Calvin Austin goes down for the season or something. You need a guy that can play
somebody
the slot,
that has that skill set.
So he can do a little bit of both. But yeah, I think that he's potentially got a lot to lose here because he could lose his job from the trade. So let's talk about projected roles and the depth chart.
Do we want to do biggest winners for Preston Smith? And
Yeah.
Okay.
Just completely skipped it.
No, you're good. I just want to make sure we do that. Yeah.
Yes. So go ahead, Shayne. Kick us off with some the winners, the beneficiaries from Preston Smith.
The entire defensive line is going to be winners from this, in my opinion. Because everybody is going to be affected in some way, shape, or form, and I think mostly going to be positive, right? Because the top guys at the edge position are going to get breaks. Now, I know these two say oh, we can play every snap, we can do this. No, you can't. Don't do that. I appreciate the ability to do so and the effort level and all that. We don't need you playing 85, 90, 95% of the snaps in some cases. We don't need that. So those two will get a break. No. Herbig will have less pressure on him as the only other guy on the roster that can actually do much of anything as either a pass rusher or a run defender. So I just think it helps the entire group, right? I just think that helps them. And even the rest of the defensive line, because he can sometimes step down and inside, and he can stand up and do some he does have that versatility that I think is going to change in some ways when he's on the field, the numbers in the run game, and kind of help them in that way too. So I think the entire defensive line could potentially be winners here.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. I mean, that's the group, and it's specifically TJ Watt. Give that man a break. He's playing too many snaps. Let him see the sideline. As much as I love TJ Watt as a run defender, you know how lethal he is in terms of punching the football out and how he has saved points at times from doing that, setting the edge, not letting guys get around him and then being able to just stack and shed. He's so good at what he does. But I don't want him to be used in that facet all the time. I want him to be fresher,
at least have a couple
more ready to go in pass rush situations. Yes, because of all the attention that he draws, and we already know about the chip rate stat. He's 10% higher, more frequently chipped than the next highest player in the NFL right now. And so, give him a break. Let him watch from the sidelines and not have to engage in those run defense battles in the trenches all the time that just wears him out. Keep him fresher. I think that he has the most to gain from this. You can get a big, strong, stout guy in there for a series for you, or at least on some run defense snaps, come in fresh on 3rd and long and then tee off on the quarterback. That's what I want to see more of TJ Watt doing. His numbers are obviously down this year, but we know that largely is attributed to the attention that he's drawn this season. It's definitely going to help, though. You got an actual rotation of edge guys, and Watt hasn't had that for most of the year. I mean, Highsmith missed a month and Herbig's been out a couple games, and so now getting a group of 4 that you have at your disposal, it opens up a whole new avenue of opportunities for the Steelers to give Highsmith and to give Watt the much-needed rest that they deserve, stay fresh on that defense. Because again, Shayne, we talked about it. All that's really going to matter at the end of the season and into the playoffs is Watt healthy? Is Highsmith healthy? I mean, those are 2 of the most important players on your team. And is Herbig healthy coming off the bench? Your team is built around your pass rush. Make sure these guys are good and ready to go. And it doesn't really matter the snap distribution before then, as long as you can get all these guys into there and your defense doesn't falter too much. So that's my thoughts on that. Any chats or anything you wanted to get to, Shayne, before we move on here?
As far as chats go, this is actually a good one here we just got. What do you guys think about the Christian Kirk deal that Pitt was in line to get done? I think it was reported by Adam Schefter, which I also believe was the case, before he broke his collarbone. Would you have liked that more? Yes, definitely would have liked it more. I do think the skill set is not as advantageous with Russell Wilson, for sure.
Yeah.
I think I would have liked that move a little bit more if Fields was still the quarterback, potentially. Just because not that he is particularly great at targeting slot type receivers, but he's been better a little bit than Wilson has in his career, numbers wise. But yeah, I mean, he's a better player. I wonder what the compensation would have been, because then maybe I wouldn't if it was significantly more than a 5th round pick. Probably wasn't. I would say at most it'd be a 4th and change, which would have still been a better player to have. But again, I don't think you're getting the same skill set impact that you would with Williams. So it's kind of iffy.
Yeah, it's a great question. We didn't know what the compensation would be, so that obviously plays a factor.
It does,
If it was going to be a day 2 pick, I would say no, I'd probably pass on that just because for the reasons you already said, Shayne, I don't think it would have been a great fit for the Steelers. Christian Kirk is one of those guys who plays 80% from the slot and 20% outside. And when he plays out on the outside, he's not as effective. And so the Steelers really needed that outside threat. They need somebody that can work on the opposite corner as George Pickens. They've got guys who can work the middle of the field. Darnell Washington, Pat Freiermuth, Calvin Austin. Like, I think that they're okay there. I think that they're potentially good there, even depending on how much you want to look towards your tight ends who are efficient when you target them.
I'd like more.
Yes. So I probably would have passed on a Christian Kirk trade unless, like you said, Shayne, it was for a 4th-ish round pick. I could have got behind that for sure. Kirk is a better player, in my opinion, than Mike Williams, but it is hard to see the fit really with Russell Wilson.
Skill sets matter in this situation.
For sure.
Yeah,
absolutely. Sure. All right, Shayne, let's project these roles and the depth chart as well for the Steelers. Now that they made these trades before the deadline, let's go one by one here and talk about Mike Williams. What is his role going to be on the team? Do you think that he slides in immediately as the wide receiver 2 over Van Jefferson? How do you see the target distribution going from here on out? Do you think that he's a guy who is going to be an impact player for the Steelers down the stretch? Do you think that he is just a slight upgrade over Van Jefferson? Let me know, Shayne, what do you think about Mike Williams and his role with the team?
So I think to start off, so this game coming up, I think he will be the 3rd outside receiver to start. I do think Jefferson is probably going to at least start the game as the number 2 receiver. And you're going to see a rotation of those 2 throughout the game. One, because you don't want to throw him in the fire immediately on, admittedly a bit of a short week by the time they traded for him, right? So, if you would have traded for him before the deadline for like a few days or even a week, it could be different, right? Where you have more time to kind of get him up to speed. But you probably will see a lot of Jefferson still in this game, but still Williams mixed in. So that's the first thing. Now, moving forward, I do think within a week or 2, we'll see his role expand to being the primary number 2 receiver. And as far as, like target share, we're looking at role and projections. I think he'll be the 4th or 5th most targeted player in the passing game, ultimately. Behind guys like Pickens, and you hope guys like Austin are still going to get more targets than him personally, is what I'm hoping for. Freiermuth, you want to see that number come up. Even Darnell Washington, dare I say, potentially. That's definitely been going up in recent weeks, and I like that. But he's going to be somewhere between, at best 3rd, probably more like 4th, 5th target player. But I think those targets are going to be much more effective than they were for Van Jefferson, which is the key thing here. I think he does upgrade that role as the number 2 receiver overall.
Yeah, Shayne, and if that prediction comes true, if he's only the 5th or 4th or 5th most targeted player on the team, he needs to be really efficient in those targets.
I think those targets are going to be the more of the downfield, like big chunk targets.
And I totally see that too. So that's how I kind of see his role. Yeah. I think that he still hovers around that 17, 18 yards a catch range. I don't think he's going to be used a lot on intermediate stuff. They're kind of just going to use him down the field, down the seam, down the sideline. Like, that's kind of the guy that he is at this point, and that's what he does best. So I think that that's going to continue. I see a role where he's getting maybe 3 to 5, maybe 6 targets a game.
Yeah.
And the Steelers, they just don't have the volume for it, really. I mean, Pickens is
a little bit more with Wilson in there, but still not as much as some other teams would have. So
more so for sure. But this is still a run-heavy team. They want to execute their style, that Mike Tomlin and Arthur Smith style of football, which they've been able to do. To give to their credit,
they have. Yeah.
Najee's coming off of the best 3-game stretch of his career, and so they're running effectively. And they're getting a healthy Jalen Warren. They're getting Cordell Patterson back soon. So that's not going to change. Like, I don't see them suddenly passing the ball a bunch more.
No.
So I'm projecting like 3 to 6-ish targets per game for Mike Williams. And again, to get your value out of that 5th round draft choice, I know it's just a 5th rounder, but you want to make it worth your while. You got to use this guy. He's got to be efficient when he's targeted. And maybe he ends up something like in the 40-ish yards per game range, Shayne. And that's something I'd probably be content with, assuming that if you're getting like 8 to 9 yards a target, like, sign me up. I think that's the efficient play is going to matter more than the volume of play. I think, in my opinion, he's not going to be a guy that gets peppered with targets for sure. But if you can be efficient, that's what's going to matter here.
Yeah. If his average per game ends up looking like 2.5 catches, 40-ish yards and a touchdown occasionally, I'm fine with that. because that is significantly more than we've been getting for Van Jefferson on a routine basis, at least. So I think that's kind of what you're looking for, is a chunk play here to a game. Maybe you throw him, a slant where you can body up a corner on a third down, or some things like that. It's going to be a very limited role, but one that I think could be important for an offense that's looking for consistency of receivers. So.
Yeah, and I'll be interested to see what they do in terms of who are the guys out there in 12 personnel, who are the guys out there in running downs and obvious run situations, or not so obvious run situations, and are they going to have any tells? Like, are they going to tip their hat and say, oh, Van Jefferson's coming in, or whoever's coming in, do we know now that it's going to be a run versus a pass? Like, I don't know how that's going to work out. That you don't want that. You don't want Matt Canada where it's like, oh, Miles Boykin and Gunnar Olszewski are out there. It is a run. It is a run play 99% of the time.
That was fun times for sure.
For a team that is really, their offense is built off of this play action passing game, and they leave me guessing a lot of times so far this season. I haven't been able to see those tells like we've seen in years past with this team. So I'm hoping that those don't all of a sudden start with Mike Williams here. Mike Williams has not graded out well as a blocker at all this year. I think he has been a good blocker in the past. So we'll see what he offers in terms of that, or if the Steelers get a different guy out there in those situations. So that's just something to keep an eye on. But yes, that's our role projections. Like you said, Shayne, if he can get 2.5, 3 catches ish per game, 40-ish yards per game, and he's doing it efficiently, I can get behind this move, because again, it's going to offer quite a bit more than what Van Jefferson was on the opposite side. Let's do the same for Preston Smith here, and we'll talk about Steelers depth chart. Projected role for Smith. Obviously, he's not playing over Watt and Highsmith, and obviously he's not going to play over Nick Herbig because he's just such a good pass rusher. So he's going to come fourth in line here. If you had to put a percentage on how many snaps you think he's going to play, percentage of the total defensive snaps per game, what do you think that's going to be?
I hope it's at least 20. That's kind of my bar, is I want it to be at least about 20, because I think if you play Herbig about 25 to 30% of the snaps and you play him about 20% of the snaps, that's enough snaps taken away from those guys to keep them somewhat fresh, right? Because that's the key thing, is that this 80+ number and 90+ number in some cases, that's just got to stop. Like we got to stop doing that. And I know they probably still will do that in some games, and there'll be games where you don't hear much from the backups and stuff like that. But you got to be prepared for the playoffs, man. You just have to, because clearly they think they can and likely will make the playoffs, and potentially even more than that. You have to have Highsmith and Watt out there, because if you don't, there's not really many matchups that you could have in the playoffs where I'm going to feel good about it if either one of those players are missing, right? I'm just not.
Yeah.
So that's so important. So if he doesn't play at least 20% of the snaps, I will have some questions about what the point was for me.
I agree. I think if you're getting less than that, you have to wonder what's the issue here. Why are you not staying in the field? 20 would be the low bar for me. I want to see as high as 40% of the snaps, because what you can do is play this guy on early downs, put him out there, let him take the brunt against him, because you're talking about a player who is 6'5". I know he coming out into the league, he was listed at 265 pounds. He's probably 275 pounds, 34-inch arms. He can stack and shed. He can even two gap at times. This guy is strong. Put him out there early downs. And obviously, running is 40% of the game. Play him nearly 40% of the snaps. I don't care. Just keep your guys fresh, because that's what's ultimately going to matter. It's not going to matter how many pass rush opportunities these guys get if they're not healthy for the playoffs. So I think, though, what to expect projected role, I would probably put it 23 to 28% of the snaps, maybe for a player like Preston Smith. And I'm optimistic that it can be even more of that once Steelers realize that he's a good run defender, and that you can kind of save the bodies of your other players out there, keep them fresh for pass rush situations. So that is the hope there. Let's talk about the depth chart here, Shayne, and how this changes things. We'll do it really briefly, because we essentially have already alluded to that. Like you said, Van Jefferson probably still gets that hat as a starting receiver this week, and then Mike Williams, I would have to imagine every week after that is going to be the starting receiver.
Yeah, I think if you were to pick a depth chart for this week, he is technically receiver 4 behind the top 3 guys that have been there. next week and every week after that, I'd be shocked if he's anything not other than wide receiver 2, at least outside receiver 2, right? Like that's kind of what I think is ultimately going to happen there. And if that doesn't happen, again, like, what are we doing? Like, I think I think the worst case scenario is that he's Van Jefferson plus, right? Which we joked about Van Jefferson being Allen Robinson plus. So now we're just doing the plus thing, which like it's still, that's fine, I guess. But like, that's the worst case scenario for me, which means if he isn't playing over Van Jefferson, then we lost the plot somewhere. Somebody messed up somewhere, right? So I'm not expecting that to happen or anything, but yeah, that's my projection there.
Yeah, Shayne, and I joked in our group chats with our Still Curtain contributors that the Steelers had Allen Robinson 2 last year, and I'm hoping they didn't just trade for Allen Robinson the 3rd right now. Like that's what his game kind of reminds me of. The Steelers tried to pigeonhole Robinson to being a slot receiver, but same type of issues. Robinson still had really good hands. The hands weren't an issue. He just couldn't separate, and he just couldn't run good enough routes at the stage of his career to be valuable.
He was like the first slot receiver fullback hybrid in a while.
Yeah, essentially what he was for this team. I gotta say that a little off topic here, but I'll be a little bit disappointed if Calvin Austin's role kind of diminishes to something really insignificant, because this guy had 2 really explosive plays last game. He had the 29-yard, I believe it was, corner route for a touchdown. Then he had the 73-yard punt return. We talked about how few players in the NFL can go east to west all the way across the sideline and then cut it upfield and still be able to score without getting caught. Like he is really, really fast and explosive. He obviously had the 55-yard touchdown catch earlier this year against the Chargers. Like, look for ways to get him the ball in his hands in space, because he can really make something happen. So I hope that the trade for Williams doesn't decrease the explosion of the offense. I hope it has the opposite effect and opens up more stuff underneath.
Yeah, on the face of it, it doesn't make sense why it would. Now, I preface the Steelers do be doing some weird stuff sometimes. I can't really argue with that for those who might say they feel differently. But if you're just looking at it like, who on the roster would Mike Williams replace? It's not Calvin Austin. So I imagine they want to continue to get the ball in his hands, because he's the only one outside of Pickens who has done pretty much anything with it that plays wide receiver. And of course, they hope that Williams is going to change that, but not in the same way that Austin has changed that, right? He's not going to replace what Austin does in the offense. So
and it does make you wonder too. I want to go back to, the Steelers drafted Roman Wilson in the 3rd round, got injured the very first practice of training camp, the high ankle sprain, missed all of the preseason, missed this early part of the season, comes back, gets another injury, and lands on IR. Like, just a really unfortunate start. And maybe we wouldn't be in this situation. Maybe they would have had something there, or maybe that just cuts into Austin's role and they just view him as only a slot receiver, and maybe they still need an outside threat anyway. Can't cry over that anymore. We'll see if he does anything this year. I kind of just think this is a redshirt year for Roman Wilson. At this point, he's missed so much time. It really reminds me of Calvin Austin's rookie year, where he had the foot injury and missed this entire rookie season. So maybe that'll be the case for him as well. Let's talk about the depth chart for when it comes to Preston Smith. And so, you're talking about 4 deep edge rotation now. What do you think is gonna happen with this?
Technically, I do think he's the 4th edge, right? Technically. Now, does it matter that much to me? Not really, because I think that the snap distribution between him and Herbig is not going to be significantly different. If anything, he might be able to, like you said, if they do the right thing in terms of his role, he might out-snap Herbig in some situations. But in terms of, like, he's the 4th best edge, because the fact at the end of the day, the best thing you can do as an edge rusher is rush the passer. He's the 4th best pass rusher. But that doesn't, again, necessarily mean that he's going to be the 4th edge in terms of snaps. It just means that he's the 4th overall edge, in my opinion.
Yeah, 100%. And I've got his numbers right here. He played 175 snaps on the right edge out at 7 tech or 9 tech out there, and 78 at left. I kind of honestly, just based on what the Steelers do, knowing that they, no matter what, they typically align somebody to TJ Watt's side every time, I kind of think he would be best served as Watt's backup. If it means that Highsmith and Herbig are still getting those one-on-one matchups all the time, just with their quickness and dip off the edge, keep exploiting those. We'll see what that looks like. But again, what really matters is he can flip-flop sides. Herbig can flip-flop some sides. and the snap distribution, playing on him early downs, using him to the best of his skill set there. Anything else, Shayne, we're ready to get to before our next point here?
The only thing I wanted to mention is actually not related to this conversation specifically, but because you mentioned the chip rate for Watt again, right, earlier, and it's just insane still. But I did have a thought, and we can maybe expand on this in the future. But what I would do personally is, let's assume the Steelers aren't going to, which they did do it against the Giants. Maybe they are. Like, if they're not going to continuously flip them, if they're not going to move them around a little bit to try to avoid that. If I was TJ, at least, now obviously you'd have to be like allowed to do this, but if I saw, like, if I knew for a fact that I was getting chipped and I was probably not going to get to the quarterback, it would be a check to one of the linebackers blitzing and me dropping out into their zone from my edge rush position. I would, because we know how good he is as like zone field guy, as a coverage defender. He's picked off passes, like he's really smart with that. Because I'm not impacting the play. If it's a chip, most likely, right? Like, it's just not going to happen. There's purposefully trying to take them away from the play. So I'm just going to basically come off the ball, just read the quarterback's eyes and try to make a play on the football at that point. Like, that's what I'd be doing, because I know it sucks, because then it takes them out of rushing the passer, but they're already doing that anyway, kind of. So I would just not let the offense get away with it personally. That's something I would consider doing. But
I like that thought, and I like trying to find basically a loophole around that. Like, if you're going to devote these guys to stopping TJ Watt, we're going to counteract that with something. We're going to bring pressure where you don't have protection. We're going to drop back Watt back, or have him knock the tight end on his butt and then drop back, whatever you want to do. But I think that at some point you got to get a little bit more creative than what Austin has been willing to do. Now, to his credit, they did flip-flop TJ Watt and Highsmith a few plays. Didn't really have much of an impact on those plays where they did that. Really small sample size. But I kind of like the idea of, all right, let's have an audible here. Let's do something that we can counteract this if you're going to devote this much attention to our best player. So good stuff.
Just a thought I had. But
yeah. All right. How will these trades impact the Steelers in 2024? Shayne, do you think that the collection of the two moves the needle at all for this team? Now, it's probably, you're talking about 30-year-old guys. They're not going to be like super significant roles. Probably doesn't swing a game, but when you get into the playoffs, and I think that both of us probably can assume this point, that's where the season is trending, based on, you look at even the depth and the strength of the teams projected to be in the AFC wildcard this year. Like, unless the Steelers really fall apart, they're heading towards the playoffs. Do you think that what they did gives them enough juice to compete with the top teams in the AFC?
I don't know if it gives them enough juice, but I do think it makes them at least like 5% better, which in a game of inches, as we all like to say, right? It's kind of the big thing that could matter, right? Like, if you think about it, Mike Williams makes one big play in a playoff game that Van Jefferson maybe wouldn't have made. That matters. If Preston Smith allows TJ Watt to not be gassed in the fourth quarter of a playoff game, that will matter. Like, those types of things, I think we won't know the overarching impact that they have until we get in those situations, right? And see if they take shape. But the potential for them to be there makes these moves worth it. And I think it's what they're thinking, right? Like, they know that we have a pretty good team here, right? We have a really good defense. We have an offense that is improving under Russell Wilson and Arthur Smith. Some of our best players are playing their best football. How can we improve the margins? Because I saw a comment earlier about, like, they would have loved to, they didn't like the trades because they wanted to get Kupp and all these other stuff. Like, yeah, ideally, sure. But he wasn't on the table because the Rams are too good, right? Like, they became too good once they got those guys back. I think that given what we could do in the situation, not looking at hindsight, because obviously, like, there's the whole Ayuk and Devontae Adams and everything else, trade sagas that we had. Looking at what was in front of them and what seemingly was available based on who else was moved, I think that they at least did a good job of improving the roster a little bit.
Yeah, very well said. Because, again, we might not see the fruits of this much during the season, or be able to really gauge the impact. Like, all right, what's the difference here between Mike Williams and Van Jefferson, or Preston Smith and the next guy up? But when you get into the playoffs and you have a situation, Mike Williams makes a big play, like you said, Preston Smith has a dominant run defense game against the Ravens in the playoffs, something like that, then you can say, all right, this is why you make those moves. This is why you did it, to give yourself a shot at a deep playoff run. And so I don't think that you'll find many Steelers fans who couldn't get behind the aggressiveness at the deadline, considering the three most important players on your team are in their 30s right now in Watt, Russell Wilson, and Cam Hayward. You might as well, what does it hurt to add two more guys in their 30s right now if they can help you get this boost? Because eventually, Shayne, and we don't know when that's going to be, but this team will have to reset and they will have to go and find an actual franchise quarterback. I don't even know if that's going to happen under Mike Tomlin. Tomlin doesn't seem like the guy who would ever be willing to bite a bullet and say, I'm going to trade 2 firsts and a second or whatever to move up in the draft and get a franchise guy. Like, maybe the Steelers will just stream quarterbacks for as long as Tomlin remains the head coach. Maybe it'll work. Maybe it won't. But this is probably the best opportunity they will have because Wilson's playing well. He's on a veteran minimum contract, but you just don't get guys of his reputation to be playing for this cheap. And so try to maximize, see what happens. But I do think that into the playoffs, if these guys can have an impact in the postseason, that's where it's ultimately going to matter. Regular season is kind of a moot point because I think this team was going there with or without these two players. Honestly, I think that you're at least trending towards a wild card spot. Even without them. With them, you hope that they can do enough in the playoffs to maybe swing a game with a big player too. So we'll find out. All right, Shayne, let's move on to our Steelers versus Commanders Week 10 preview. We had the week off last week. We did our midseason awards. So now we're back to previewing the upcoming game here. This is a tough one. This is a really, and I don't think anybody would have thought this was a daunting opponent. When the schedule release popped back in May, I'm like, all right, this should be a win for the Steelers. I know it's on the road, but it's the Commanders now. I mean, they're a train wreck. They've got a new coaching staff. They're going to have a rookie quarterback. Well, it turns out Dan Quinn is having a good season as a head coach of Commanders. Jaden Daniels is having a really good season as a rookie quarterback. That's something we don't see very often at all, but he has been dominant at times. This team can score points. I mean, they're third in the league with over 29 points a game. They're going to be, it's not going to be an easy team to slow down. And I think that you're going to see some issues here when it comes to Steelers defense trying to stop the Commanders offense. The Steelers are 2.5-point road underdogs in this contest after winning 3 straight games pretty convincingly. So what do you make of this line in week 10?
I think it's interesting because this would indicate to me that they slightly favor the Steelers in a neutral environment, which I guess considering even the amount of success they've had, the defense is still very suspect. And it is a rookie quarterback at the end of the day, right? There's always that potential that he has a bad game just because of being a rookie. And against the Mike Tomlin defense and defense that we have, it would make sense for it to be against us, right? So I think it makes sense for us to definitely be underdogs considering we're on the road. But I wouldn't have been shocked if it was, 3.5, 4, just because of how well they've played this year so far.
Yeah. It is interesting to see where that line comes in. Obviously, the Steelers have had the bye week to prepare for this team.
It does help as well. Yeah.
So they've had a little bit of extra time there. Maybe that kind of factors into it. But this one is a hard game to predict because I can see it going a number of different ways. Let's talk about injuries here, Shayne. And this is where the Steelers are starting to get a big advantage again. You're getting your guys back, and this is what they needed. We talked about the edge defenders getting decimated with Highsmith missing time, Herbig missing time. They've had injuries in the secondary. They've had season-ending injuries on the offensive line to James Daniels and Troy Fautanu. And so now you are finally getting healthy again. Zach Frazier should be coming back. And again, we're saying this before the first official injury report of the week. We've got to monitor and see who's coming back this week. But as of Tomlin's Tuesday press conference for week 10, he pointed to the potential return of Zach Frazier, at least coming back to practice. Corey Trice Jr., good to see him mentioned among those names. He was playing really well before he suffered that hamstring injury because for some reason the Steelers decided to play him as a special teams gunner instead of just letting an injury-prone guy play on defense, which I know it's you got to do what you got to do when you're a late-round draft pick. But Nick Herbig, I mean, the return of Nick Herbig is huge for what he offers from a pass rush standpoint, Cordell Patterson. And so we'll see which of these guys comes back this week, and maybe some of them have to wait until the following week. But their practice window's open. Tyler Matakavich as well. So that's a lot of players. That's a lot of role players that you're getting back all at once. It helps your depth. It helps keep guys fresh. Frazier, obviously, I had nothing against McCormick McCollum, excuse me, Ryan McCollum, who stepped in. I think that McCollum did a really good job with the assignments that he had. Some brutal assignments there, particularly against Dexter Lawrence. But Frazier is just a different type of animal here. I think that he has already shown the ability to just bulldoze you in the running game. He's the second highest rated center in the NFL, according to Pro Football Focus already, and he's a 23-year-old rookie. So that's going to be really nice to get back. It's a very encouraging outlook overall in terms of injuries, and we'll have to monitor and see which of these guys are going to play this week.
Yeah, if they all play, this line makes more sense even than I said it did before, because with the way the Steelers are playing currently, right? And obviously you don't want to buy too much into it because they weren't playing teams that, let's just say, are particularly strong, right? Let's just say that. Yeah. But when you play bad teams, the Steelers have had a tendency at times to play down to those teams, and they have not done that in the last 3 weeks, right? So that is encouraging within itself. But when you get all these guys back, the depth of the roster is obviously better. You don't have to rely as much on some other guys that haven't been as good as these players. And it just it gives a lot of life to the team when you get a Zach Frazier back, who's been the linchpin of that offensive line. When you get a Cordell Patterson back, who, as great as Najee's been, and as much as Jalen's starting to look healthy, he had the most explosive juice on the team whenever he was playing running back. He still has that juice. So I think all those guys being back, if they are all back, really kind of changed the outlook of what this team could potentially look like on both sides.
Yeah, Shayne, maybe that's enough to swing a game. Or you get these guys back and they can get up to speed quickly. That can make a big difference for this one. As far as Commanders injuries goes, they don't have a lot. They've been a pretty healthy team.
Yeah, they have been lucky.
Jonathan Allen on IR, obviously that's a big one for them. And then just trading for Marshawn Lattimore. Is he going to play this week? How much will he play this week? He's a corner. You would think that they'd be able to kind of slot him in and kind of get him up to speed quickly. I like what it would have looked like without Lattimore this week if Lattimore didn't play, because they just don't have those pieces in the secondary. So not a lot from an injury front to note there. But let's talk about some matchups in this contest, Shayne. And the big one for me is it's kind of similar to some of the other games we've seen this season. Terry McLaurin is the offense of this team. Obviously, you got to stop Jaden Daniels. He can extend the play. He can scramble and run for yards. But if you stop Terry McLaurin, they don't have another threatening wide receiver that's going to kill you. I say that as Noah Brown had that immaculate reception, the game winner off of the tipped pass. But for the most part, you're okay with Noah Brown beating you a few times. You're okay with Zacchaeus beating you. Zacchaeus is a starting receiver in the NFL today, Shayne. That. They've got some work to do on the roster. I think there's a lot of encouraging signs if you're a Commanders fan, because you've got your franchise quarterback now. But this isn't the strongest roster. And if you can contain Terry McLaurin, that's going to be a huge factor in winning this game.
Yeah, he's the number one target, right? He's the guy that makes the offense go in terms of the passing game. He's the guy that has really linked up with Jaden Daniels as the deep ball guy for them. And you gotten some occasional plays from other guys, of course. And Diami Brown's the guy I continue to talk about sometimes with people, because I'm like, every time he gets chances, he looks good. So I don't know why he isn't the third or even second receiver on this team at times. But that's besides the point. Maybe it's just me. But in general, I think that their roster is – they're playing better football than we anticipated, obviously. Yeah. And it's not just because Jaden Daniels is good, right? It's not just because of that. But these guys are not world beaters outside of Terry McLaurin. They just aren't. It's not somebody that you have to sit there and go, oh, man, if we don't double this guy, he's going to destroy it. That's not the case, right? So I think that in general, this offense is certainly containable. It's potentially containable. And not many teams have done a good job of doing that. But it's not this world-beating roster that we have to contend with necessarily.
Yeah. To their credit, they're playing so much better than the lack of star power, maybe, if you will, would indicate on their team. This is a good football team. They're going to be right there competing in the NFC, and they've got a really good rookie quarterback. That can be enough. Now, historically, the Steelers have been really good against rookie quarterbacks, but they haven't played Jaden Daniels yet, and everyone is different. He's just off to such a strong start. We'll see how this goes. They've got a lot of experience going against mobile quarterbacks. They go against Lamar Jackson, different players. Obviously, Jackson is more of I'm going to scramble around. I'm going to try to make something happen. And Watt has been one of the best in the league at containing him. The Steelers defense in general have, but when Jaden Daniels gets the ball on timing, are they going to be able to stop that? So that's another one there too, is how are they going to have a defense for maybe the most impressive rookie in the NFL this year?
Yeah, that's the question, is because they are, like, as much as they do have experience with players like him in terms of the mobility, it is a bit of a different story than it is with like guys like Lamar and Kyler Murray and other guys like that, where Daniels is a true, like, he's going to take off and run, threaten you in that way. Whereas Lamar is not really quite that way as much anymore, right? Especially in recent years. He is much more of a, I'm going to use my athleticism to manipulate the pocket and make you make a mistake before you can get to me, right? Like, that's more of what he's been kind of up to the past couple of years. And Murray as well, as he's just is super dynamic as well in that way. So I do think that is something that they're going to have to figure out how they want to rush him, right? Because I don't know if they're going to treat Watt the same way as other teams have treated him, because they might want him to come upfield and let Daniels try to beat him around the corner or beat him by stepping up and running through the open space. Like, so that could impact, how our rush lanes kind of look too. It's going to be very interesting to see what they choose to do in terms of trying to contain him in the pocket, or do they want to force him out? It's kind of hard to say, because he has played better outside the pocket as a passer than he showed in college. So it's not a guarantee you can win by just flushing him and trying to make him throw. So.
Yeah, agreed. And any other matchups you want to highlight here, Shayne, for Steelers Commanders?
I mean, the run game for both teams is going to be huge, because I think the advantage is especially the Steelers' case in the run game. But Brian Robinson has been fantastic for them. Eckler has chipped in as well. I think Robinson will be back this week. I know he missed his past game. He might be. I haven't checked to see if he's definitely back or not. But that running game has been excellent outside of Daniels too. It's not just been him affecting the run game. It's very similar to, ironically, back with RG3 when this team had him. Like, the running game was awesome because of him, but it was also great because of other guys there, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, agreed. Running games can play a huge factor, of course, in this game. And again, not the best defense you're going against, but they can absolutely score points against you.
Yes.
Do you think this is going to turn into a shootout type of game? So let's make our game predictions, Shayne, and I want a score from you. Obviously, the Steelers, typically when you play Steelers football and you win Mike Tomlin type Steelers football games, you're holding teams to 17 points or under. The last week, 18 points. So, and Steelers on the season, 14.9 points allowed. It's second in the NFL in points allowed per game. That's not going to happen this week. I just don't see a scenario where you're holding the teams to what your NFL averages through half a season. Like, you are about to start a harder slate of schedule. You got Commanders this week. You got the Ravens next week. And we could talk about why they couldn't flex that Ravens Steelers game to Sunday Night Football.
Unfortunately.
There was a ruling with CBS has to have one of those Steelers Ravens games. Fox has the other. So contractually with the broadcast networks, they were not able to do that. I would have loved to see that.
That'd be nice.
Not going to happen. It's going to be at 1:00 anyway. Sidebar there. The Steelers aren't going to be able to hold Commanders to 14 points in this game. And do you think that they're going to be able to hold them under 20 points a game? Probably not. I don't know, Shayne. I'm interested to hear what you have to say about this.
I don't think it's going to be a shootout in the terms of, like, both in the 30s or anything crazy. But my prediction is kind of creeping towards that range. I think the Steelers do ultimately win this game, actually. And I think the main reason why is because, again, they're coming off the bye. They're getting a lot of players back. Jaden Daniels, for as great as he's played, like, this is going to be kind of a different test for him compared to a lot of the defenses he's played this year. I do think that the Steelers are able to pull this one out, but it's going to be close. I think 27-24 is what I settled on. I think there's going to be points in this game. I think the Steelers offense has played well enough against defenses that are comparable to this defense that I think they can get up in that 20-plus range. But it's just, can the defense do enough to keep them from being able to also do the same? I think they have an up and down day, but I think they make enough plays where the other defense cannot do so, and they end up winning 27-24.
Okay, Shayne, I'm going to go the other way. I've got the Commanders beating the Steelers 24-20. And I think that theoretically the Steelers offense should be able to score 20 points in this game.
Yes.
But you have a few less of those moon balls that go your way. Maybe that's all that it takes. They could be shaking some rust off. If Mike Williams gets involved, there's going to be some chemistry that's got to be worked on there. I just feel like 2 Russell Wilson good games in a row. Can we make it a third? Maybe. I think this is a good football team. And so maybe the score ends up being a little bit higher than what it is. The Steelers typically are under the projected point total, which I think for this week is 45.5. So I have it coming in just under that mark. But the Commanders are a good team. And again, what we know historically under Mike Tomlin, this team typically has to hold teams to under 20 points to win a football game. If they allow 24, are they able to win it? We'll find out. It's a low percentage when they do these past several years. So we'll see what's in store for week 10. All right. If you guys have any other comments, please drop them in the chat below or leave us a comment and a like on YouTube. Please help others to find this stream. Thank you for joining us in the chat today. R. Barley, Dan, the Steelers fan, Shay, Jared, anybody who chimed in with comments that I'm seeing here real quickly. Thank you for joining us on the show today. We go live every single Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. Also, check out Josh Yors's show. Yes. He goes live every Monday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. And he has some good stuff over there. Sometimes they'll have some guests on as well. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also, check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Still Curtain Steelers podcast. And thanks again for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.